create, as it shows in the Muslim Brotherhood handbook, create a caliphate, that Egypt was going to be the first new caliphate in the Middle East. Rewriting the Constitution so he could never be elected out of office, or if he was, one of his brothers could come in. Cracking down on people, and so the same students that had seen Mubarak ousted, and again we met with them, started again. And they came from different groups. It was very interesting. It wasn't just one or two people in some group. It was a whole bunch of disparate student groups, and this group from this university, and that group from somewhere else. So they started their campaign again. 22 million people, 13.2 voted for him. 22 million people signed a petition asking him to leave. And the generals said, well, we can't ask him to leave, but how about a referendum? So they went to Morsi and said, look, Mr. President, we got 22 million people, and we're starting to have a lot of violence. We've got 22 million people go lunch a year. We need a referendum. Can we have a referendum so, you know, to assure the voting populace that you should be the president? No way. So then 33 million people went to the streets to protest Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. And when they went to the streets the end of June last year? Yeah, end of June last year. When they went to the streets, violence broke out all over. Incidentally, behind the backdrop of all this violence, as many of you may know, the Coptic churches, Christians were totally being brutalized by the Muslim Brotherhood. Churches destroyed. Churches going back to the 4th century were being destroyed. Christians' homes being destroyed, businesses being destroyed, people being murdered. So, 33 million people are out in the street, there's protests, there's violence, there's stuff happening. The generals said we have no choice. They went in and arrested Morsi. And right after they arrested Morsi, did they do what happens in a normal coup? Now, coup was the big word in Washington. Everybody was saying it's a coup. Let me remind you that typically when there's a coup, the first thing the coup leaders do is assassinate or jail, under the harshest conditions, the guy that they just booted out. Then they declare martial law. Then they have police and military on every corner, and the city becomes real dark. That didn't happen. As soon as the generals jailed Morsi, they appointed an interim president who they reported to. And they called the Constitutional Committee together to write a new constitution, because the old constitution had no provisions for impeaching somebody like Morsi would have been impeached. And now General Sisi, now President Sisi, elected by a pretty good margin, is the guy in charge over there. This administration still doesn't quite, they don't know how to handle it. They don't quite want to acknowledge him. They have to, but they don't want to. They're still holding back on promised military aid. When we met with General Sisi, he was an interesting guy. I thought he was very forthcoming with us. His staff couldn't have been nicer. Most of them educated in the United States at military schools, as was General Sisi. Did his time at some of the Army schools, which is typical for a general officer leadership in countries that we're friends with. He's got a lot of friends here in the United States. One of the questions we asked was, what are your real priorities over here if you become president? But frankly, what are your priorities right now? He said, I have two priorities. Number one, the Suez Canal. My number one job as a military commander is keep the Suez Canal open and safeguarded. And number two, the safety and security of Israel. So because we view Israel as our friend, we view Israel as part of the war that we have against the radicals. And he said, we know the radicals are out there. They're in Syria right now. We're afraid they're going to win in Syria and then make their way to Jordan and make their way to Israel and make their way to us. And he was absolutely right. And this was before ISIS ever really surfaced. So General Sisi, we thought, and he also said, we have the best relationship with Israel we've ever had. Now that we're in charge and Morsi's out, because under Morsi, the tunnels to Gaza were open for the free flow of weapons from Iran, a lot of which we've been seeing fired in the last few weeks. A lot of rockets that were provided while Morsi was in charge. One of the things Sisi wanted to do was shut down those tunnels, cut off the supply of arms to Hamas, who he viewed as an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood, an extension of the overall problems we have. So, without getting too carried away, I ask all of you to, when we hear Egypt, let's think of them in positive terms. Somebody who wants to work with us, not against us. General Sisi is, incidentally, he's in Moscow, I think, this week, talking to the Russians about military aid. Why would he go talk to the Russians about military aid? Because he can't get it from us. They're also the ones that are trying to broker the peace agreement right now between Israel and Hamas, as everybody may know. They're working on our behalf. This administration refuses to acknowledge that, because this administration believes in true democracy. That means the Muslim Brotherhood and Mohammed Morsi coming back in and taking over Egypt. Now, I'll talk just a little bit about Israel and Hamas. I've been on TV a number of times about it, and this is one of those cases where I may go on TV and talk about something in Iraq, and as I'm sitting there, they'll say, Colonel, we need to talk about what's happening right now in Israel. Can you do it? Yeah, I can do it. I'll grind through the machine here and come up with the answers. I was asked today, is there ever going to be peace between Hamas and Israel? And here's what I think, and again, I've been to Israel a few times. I think as long as Hamas, and this almost sounds like what the Israelis are saying, but I've thought through it pretty carefully. As long as Hamas is an armed entity, dedicated to the overthrow of Israel, dedicated to killing Israelis, dedicated to terrorist acts, how can there be peace? There could be peace, and I think Israel would give up and open up the borders around Gaza in a heartbeat, and open up the borders over there on the West Bank in a heartbeat, if all those people would disarm and allow Israel to live in peace with them. But Hamas doesn't want to disarm. They don't want to disarm. They don't care if their own people get killed. It's to their benefit if they do. Because the world looks at it and says, oh, see what those Israelis are doing? The fact of the matter is that there will never be peace there until Hamas is disarmed. The Israelis can't disarm them. The United Nations can't disarm them. Maybe some of their Arab partners can encourage them to disarm. Some of you may have noticed that Saudi Arabia was very quiet the last few weeks. They did not criticize Israel. Jordan, very quiet. Nobody was criticizing. People who would typically criticize Israel, they're not criticizing Israel. Why? Because they realize the threat that Hamas, Hezbollah, and now ISIS poses to them. And some of the Arab states are getting a little bit more cautious about who they're supporting and why. We'd like to see them all step up a little bit more in a number of areas. Now, I'll talk a little bit about Syria, and again, I apologize for moving around, but there's so much to talk about. Tomorrow we could be talking about any one of these places, despite what's in the news tonight. Our relationship with Syria, again, when I started working in '83 in Beirut, I was working against, before there was a Hezbollah, I was working against those guys. I was working against the Syrians, and I was working against the Iranians too. And Syria is such an interesting story because Syrian involvement against the United States goes back to the embassy bombing in 1983, April of 1983. They were involved in that bombing. They were involved in the bombing of the Marine compound, the planning for Pan Am 103, which some Libyans ended up being convicted of, really started out in Syria. Many terrorist acts against the United States started out in Syria. Syrians were involved throughout the war in Iraq in the killing of American servicemen and women. We knew it. We knew where their training camps were. A lot of insurgents, foreign fighters that came into Iraq would fly into Damascus on a one-way ticket. Get off the plane, be met by Syrian intelligence, moved out to eastern Syria, settled in a training camp, given some training, moved across the border into Iraq to go after Americans. Syria was involved in every bit of that. We knew that too. We've known their involvement in stuff forever. And you know what we've done about it? Nothing. Nothing. In President Clinton's administration, 8 years, 52 trips by senior Clinton administration personnel, including President Clinton himself, to go meet with Bashir Assad, the current president's father, Hafez al-Assad, to try to encourage him to stop supporting terrorism. Every time they went, he said, you bet. I'm with you. I agree. It's a terrible thing. Nothing changed. Even Colin Powell, and I don't remember what year, 2004 maybe, went over and met with Hafez al-Assad and came back and had a press conference and said, I just met with the president of Syria, and he's assured me that Syria will stop supporting terrorism. They didn't change one thing. Colin Powell was no smarter than those guys that went before him. It's something about sitting there and drinking their tea and smiling and saying, yeah, inshallah, God willing. So Syria's been a problem with us for us. Now, this president, we signed up for the ousting of Assad, and frankly, if you look at it now, I remember saying about 6 months ago, it was getting to the point of who would we rather have, Assad or the people who were fighting against him, trying to oust him. I think we know that answer right now. Would we rather have Assad or ISIS in Syria? I think that should be clear, and I'll talk more about ISIS in a few minutes if you're not up to date on it. Isn't that strange how that turns around? Assad's a better option for us right now. because we messed up. We failed, and I believe this to be correct, some of us were talking about this a long time ago, we failed to empower the moderate Syrian resistance 2.5, 3 years ago. Hillary Clinton right now is saying today, well, I wasn't with the president on that. I wanted to support the moderate Syrian resistance. She may say that now. She didn't say it then. She's angling for a little bit of a better record than she has. The fact of the matter is, I know a lot about this kind of stuff. I know how it works. I know what we do. We had ample opportunities to support the moderate Syrian resistance. Guys who really, people who they were Muslims, but they represented Western values. They wanted democracy. They wanted something better for their country. They were willing to align with the United States and Europe. All of those were better choices than we had with Bashir Assad. We failed to do it. We didn't do it. And instead, the radicals got in there, Al-Qaeda elements moving out of Western Iraq, moving over into Syria to start the fight against Assad. And it was Al-Qaeda, and then it was Al-Nusra, and then it became ISIS, and it just grew and grew and grew to it's a big problem, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But here's another missed opportunity. Yeah, we wanted to see the Arab Spring work, and then we had a chance for the Arab Spring to work with a little bit of help, but we didn't help. We didn't do anything, and we are going to pay a penalty for those kinds of mistakes. So Assad, I can't believe I'm saying it, Assad's a better choice than resistance. We wouldn't have to be saying that if we'd have done the right thing at the right time. Now, I'm skipping around the Middle East. I'm leaving out a whole bunch of countries. I had to write them down just to make sure. I'm not going to talk about the Saudis other than what I just said about them changing their mind a little bit. Turkey, Erdogan, who was the prime minister, is now the president. We have problems with him. This president has problems with him. They do not get along. The Turks they're a funny situation. It's hard to see where they're going. They used to be one of our strongest allies. Absolutely one of our strongest allies in the region. They're not anymore. I don't know to what degree we can trust them. They're aligning themselves a little bit more with Iran. They're guilty, perhaps, of sending a lot of the weapons that ISIS initially got when they grew up. It's tough. Jordan, a wonderful friend of ours, a good friend, a strong supporter, but a small country. More people in Jordan are Palestinians than they are Jordanians. That's a problem the king over there has to deal with all the time. But I think we can always count on his support until such time as there may be a Palestinian uprising. They've had some problems with no Arabs, right? The United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar. Qatar, we have a big military base in Qatar. Who's the biggest financial supporter of ISIS? Qatar. What's wrong with this picture? Doesn't make sense. I don't think Qatar understands that they're threatened by these ISIS guys too. They think, oh, we're all Sunnis, it's got to be good. No, it's not. No, it's not all good. Yemen, there's a lot of problems in Yemen. I left them out. So having covered the Middle East a little bit, let me jump over to Russia and Ukraine. I think I'm going to do a television hit tomorrow on Ukraine. As of today, the Ukrainian government seems to be winning in their fight against the separatists. They're fighting around this town of Donetsk right now, which is close to the Russian border. There's 1 million people in that town. 1 million people. It's not a little town. Sometimes we tend to think of these places as just some little town somewhere. No, 1 million people. And the separatists have had a strong presence there for some time, but the Ukrainian forces are doing well. Now, having said that, there's 20,000 Russian troops. That's the numbers we see, maybe more like 40, right up against the border now in Russia. There were reports today that a lot of their trucks are being painted with humanitarian, Red Cross, all kinds of signs. It looks like they're peacekeepers. And there are some pretty good indications, and I think the Pentagon's nervous, that the Russians are going to move into Ukraine now. They're actually going to cross the border. And they're going to come over there under the guise of peacekeeping, and we're coming over to protect and defend our fellow Russians and our friends over there in Ukraine who want to be part of our country. Mind you, it'll be almost the same trick that they used to get to Crimea. When I say that, I can't believe it. We just let Russia walk away with Crimea, and nobody did anything about it. I'm not saying we go to war with Russia. I certainly don't want that. Although I would not, I wouldn't put it past Vladimir Putin to drop a tactical nuclear weapon somewhere. He's not going to fire one at us. But I wouldn't put it past him to use one sometime. Why not? What are we going to do? Fire a nuclear weapon back at him? No. Launch a conventional war against him? No. He's got Europe so tied up right now, they don't know what to do. And the best we can do is sanctions. This goes for the Iranians too, sanctions. I'll say one thing about sanctions. There's nothing visible about sanctions. I want to see something visible. Oh yeah, sanctions are going to hurt, and some people in Russia can't visit, and the banks, you know, it's going to be a little bit tougher for goods and services. I don't care. I want to see something. Most people want to see something. Sanctions are words to most of us. Let's see something. How about providing some material support to the Ukraine when Crimea was taken? How about providing them some of the weapons? Not that we want them to fight. We don't want anybody to fight. But let's at least empower them in case there is a fight. Let's provide them some weapons. Let the Russians see that. We're going to provide them weapons. We're going to provide them training. We're going to do something besides just giving them MREs. And not only that, let's go back and readdress the issue of the missile defense shield in Poland and the Czech Republic. Let's readdress it. Remember, the Bush administration did a lot of backflips to get Poland and the Czech Republic to agree to the missile defense shield. And as a reminder, the missile defense shield story always was, well, it's in case the Iranians build a nuclear weapon and can put it on an intercontinental ballistic missile. Maybe. I think it had a lot more to do with Russia, which is why the Russians opposed it so vehemently. Absolutely opposed it. It really cut down on their ability to use tactical or strategic nuclear weapons. So I would say worthwhile to go back and readdress that whole issue and tell the Russians, look, we know things aren't the way you all want it, but we're going to put that missile defense shield up again. Wouldn't that send a message? Let's at least send a message. We're a world power. We don't have to send B-52 bombers. Let's send the symbolic stuff that makes a difference. Something besides sanctions. Incidentally, just, you know, so everybody kind of understands how Crimea went down and how eastern Ukraine went down. This is a tried and true trick of sending in operatives, provocateurs, agents, intelligence people, looked like Ukrainians, spoke Russian, had friends in the Ukraine, had former Russian expatriates living over there. Do anything you can to flood that area with people who support your cause. I don't care how long it takes, do it. And then have them generate the interest, generate the enthusiasm. Let them be visible about, we want to be part of Mother Russia. They did that very effectively, extremely effectively. And it worked in Crimea. And it's the same kind of thing they've been trying to do in the rest of eastern Ukraine. And frankly, as some of you may remember in the news, Moldova is worried about the same thing. They have a Russian population. Lithuania, worried about the same thing. Belarus, worried about the same thing. All of them have small but present Russian populations who can be the catalyst for dissent and division and people coming in and starting to show like we want to be part of Mother Russia, and creating the environment for somebody like Putin, who appears to have very few constraints to do something. You know, we threatened, when they downed the airliner, we threatened Putin with more sanctions. He doubled down. The next day, he's sending more military equipment into the separatists. I mean, this guy's not backing away from us. We're all talk. He's all action. And I think the rest of Europe sees that. Besides being worried about the loss of energy, access to energy, and loss of trade, which is important to all of them, but they're also looking to us for some kind of leadership, and they're sure not seeing it. And therefore, they're not going to really have a backbone until we do. And we all know that up to this point, we don't. Now, let's move over to Asia rather quickly. Chinese are doing the same kind of stuff over there. Taking islands away from the Vietnamese, arguing with the Philippines over islands that they're ultimately probably going to get, because they're watching this faulty American leadership. Chinese aren't worried about the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese actually asked us to help them. I mean, that's the kind of world we're in right now. Of course, we didn't, and we're not going to. But nonetheless, Chinese see this opportunity to do the same things that Russians do. And they're doing it with some effectiveness. They're not as bold and brash yet. They're not out there. They're not using military force per se. They've had military gunboats and aircraft activity working in the South China Sea, working over there on the Western Pacific. But I don't think we're going to see them in a shooting thing like we have. But that's right now. Chinese have long-term goals. You know, I always like to say when I speak about the Chinese, they are our biggest threat in my judgment. The biggest threat the United States faces over the long term is the Chinese. Because the Chinese operate on the 1,000-year plan. 1,000-year plan, whatever it takes, however long it takes. The United States operates on the 4-year plan. And if we get another president in for another 4 years, then it has become the 8-year plan. But as soon as those 4 or 8 years are over, we're off on another plan. And that's how we do our strategic planning. It's pretty much short-term. Chinese don't work that way. And Putin's not working that way right now either. He's got a long-term plan, and he's going to keep pushing until somebody pushes it back a little bit. So China, another problem. I didn't even mention Taiwan, and all of you know that Chinese have always wanted to take Taiwan back. There are some people that think, given the right circumstances, they'll make a move on Taiwan, and again, we won't do anything about it. Okay. So, I don't know how long I've been speaking. Let me...
An hour?
No, I haven't been speaking an hour. No, wait. I have no idea. I'm sorry. That's why on Fox, when I first started doing Fox, I get wound up and start talking. And in the old days, they would start playing music when they wanted you to quit. So I meant to tell you, if anybody wanted me to quit, just start singing and I'll do it. I'm almost done here. I'm almost done. All of these things we just talked about, or I just talked about, they are all sideline issues right now. Every one of them. They're all sideline issues. You know what the real issue is? ISIS. ISIS, who has come out of nowhere. Not really out of nowhere, but they've come to the public eye out of nowhere. I get so much stuff on the web. I just, before I came here, looked at the most horrifying pictures. I don't look, I mean, I glance, I don't like to look at it. I've seen enough of it in real life. The most horrifying pictures you can imagine. And all of you, if you haven't seen them, you'll either see them or you'll hear people talk about them. And this is the nature of what we're dealing with right now. I think even most Muslims would be aghast at what they would see out of this group of ISIS. Barbaric, I don't know what the word is to describe these guys. When you talk about beheading little children, because they're Christians or they're Yazidis or they're Shiites, what in the world are we talking about? And here's the problem with ISIS. First of all, they do exist because we didn't do, as I suggested earlier, empower the moderates a long time ago and take them on. And we weren't watching. The CIA failed miserably when ISIS can run up and charge across Iraq and take major towns and cities without anything happening. What we're doing against ISIS right now is just pinpricks. We're just spending time. We're dropping some bombs. We're trying to help defend the Kurds. Maybe if ISIS starts to move to Baghdad, maybe we'll do something there. I think the Shiite militias in Baghdad are going to be strong enough to keep ISIS out of Baghdad. But all that doesn't matter. ISIS owns so much land right now. They have all the land they need for a caliphate. They have enough oil fields. They're certainly trading. I mean, business life goes on in all these towns that they've taken over. In the worst days of the fighting in Beirut, I mean the worst days of the fighting, Beirut was still an operating city. I sat and had tea one time, and 2 blocks down was a horrendous firefight. And we're sitting here having tea like there's nothing going on. We're just hearing it and glancing down there saying, oh, none of the bullets ricochet this way. It seems strange, but in all these towns, all these places that ISIS has taken over, life is going on. The markets are open. People, for the most part, are eating. Unless you're a Christian or other minority hiding for some reason, you're still out there. ISIS is on a roll. Now, what's the biggest deal about ISIS? Well, ISIS makes Al-Qaeda look like the Little League. ISIS is real. They're big. They're dominant. They're capable. The worst thing about ISIS is their ability to recruit. And some of you probably heard they have maybe 2,000 by now, perhaps more, Europeans. Europeans that look for the most part like us. They have European passports, no visa required. Get on a plane, fly to the United States. They have maybe as many as 200 Americans now with American passports, look like us. I even suggested today that they may not all be Muslims. You know, this is, some people get inspired and excited about stuff like this. I mean, people do. Now they may become Muslims later, but it doesn't matter. Their recruiting is very effective and it's working very well for them. And so now they're getting recruits from around the world, foreign fighters from around the world. So it's not just who they have who are Muslims. It's all these other people. It's these other people that present a threat to us. You know, we had the first, some of you may know, first suicide bomber, American suicide bomber in Syria, who was a young guy, born and raised in Florida. Went to school in Florida. Got inspired by what was going on in Syria. Flew to Turkey, made his way into Syria, got trained, came back to the United States for a couple of months, hung around, got on a plane, went back over, and did a suicide bombing. I think he and a couple other guys killed 4 or 14 or something like that. But the point was, here was an American. And the real point in all this is that the burden now on American intelligence and American law enforcement is unbelievable. We've got to have an ability to identify these guys going over, pick up information on them while they're over here, and catch them when they're coming back to the United States. And there will be people that slip through that net and get back here and want to do something. Now, I was in Washington, D.C. when the D.C. snipers were up there. That terrorized that city. They killed her. I don't remember the number, but I'll never forget being up there. What was going on? That city was shut down almost by 2 guys operating out of an old Chevy Biscayne or something like that. You get some guy that's been trained over there by ISIS back here in the United States. I'll tell you, you bring in one SA-7 shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile, and there's thousands of them out there on the market. You bring one through the southern border, you get it into the United States, you get it to your guy, he goes to Dulles Airport or Washington National and fires it. Doesn't have to hit the plane. If he does, more power to him. It may not bring the plane down. It's designed more for smaller planes, but just fire one. You know what's going to happen to U.S. commercial aviation? It's done. It's done for a long, long time. So that's the kind of impact that 1 or 2 or more guys can have. We are in big trouble. Is it going to happen here at Myrtle? No. Is it going to happen in D.C.? Maybe. You know, again, the big name places are what bring the most attention. But I'll tell you what, if they fire one missile or carry out one other terrorist attack here, what a recruiting tool for ISIS. ISIS, most powerful organization in the world, able to strike at the United States, and the United States can do nothing. All right, so now let me get down to the real end here. It's about leadership. This president gets criticized for lack of leadership, but actually on a couple fronts he is a good leader. The racial divide. He's done a damn good job. You know, you got to give him credit. Some of it's pretty subtle, but he's done a damn good job. How about class warfare? Oh, yeah. Damn right. He's been a damn fine leader. My wife said, how about fundraising? How about golf? How about vacations? Yeah.
Said in the Cayman Islands?
The reality is that we do need leadership. We need it right now, as you all know, more than ever. And I'm just going to focus for a second on ISIS, because that's, if there's ever one place we want this president or anybody else to devote their time, it's on ISIS. My prescription would be to call a summit right now. We are acting like we're the only ones who are going to be the victims of ISIS. We're not. We need a summit right now. We need a summit of all our Middle Eastern players. We need a summit of our European allies. All those countries that are threatened by ISIS, we need to have a summit right now, including Iran and Syria. Let's all get to the table. Let's lay out what the stakes are for all of them and us, because they're all threatened by ISIS. And let's come up with a plan and a strategy. Let's have all of our friends and allies participate in whatever action it is we're going to take against ISIS. And while we're all talking about what we're going to do, let's pound the hell out of them. We can't be dropping enough bombs on them. Every piece of heavy equipment they have has to be obliterated immediately. And I'm sorry, I have never in my career have I liked or wanted to see civilians die. But some civilians are going to die. And that's what happens. It's unfortunate. It's a tragedy. But I think we'd rather have civilians die over there than civilians die here. And those are the kind of choices we have to make, just like we did in World War II, dropping bombs on Germany, or them dropping bombs on Britain. Those are the kinds of tough decisions that have to be made, because I guarantee you, if we don't make those decisions, ISIS is never going to defeat the United States, but they're going to, or other Western countries. They might defeat some Middle Eastern states, but they're going to make life miserable for all of us. They're going to make it miserable. It's not a life that we want to live, where our children and our grandchildren, or even ourselves, have to worry every day when we go to the mall, or when we ride an airplane, or when we do this or do that. We have got to take ISIS on. Incidentally, I would also fire the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I have a hard time looking for real leadership out of our senior military leaders, and the only way you become a senior military leader these days is you bow to the president. You bow to it, yeah. You listen to the president. president. What the president wants, that's what you want. And you don't go into him and ask him to make tough decisions. Now, and I'm going to close out by saying I also went to India a couple times in the last few years. And when we talk about China being the biggest threat that we face, we need to realize that our counterbalance to China, in my judgment, is India. We don't have the kind of relationship with India that we need. 1.3 billion people. They have their own issues with China. The more we can keep India working against China, the more time we have, the more relief we have. So we need to thank our Indian friends who come here. A lot of wonderful, smart Indians working in the United States. I wish we had some people from Indian descent here tonight. India is very, very important to us. Don't underestimate the value. And incidentally, they have major problems with Islamic terrorism in India. It's never reported here. Major problems in India. And of course, they have their problems with Pakistan. Pakistani terrorism. All right, so what do we need to be worried about? My last card. Well, we all know this already, or we wouldn't be sitting here tonight. We need to worry about loss of our own freedoms here in the United States. My biggest worry in the U.S. is, with due respect to anybody here who is or was in law enforcement, I worry about U.S. law enforcement. I worry about them being empowered so that every little town has a SWAT team and an MRAP and this armored vehicle and that armored vehicle. I've had 2 experiences with law enforcement in the last year, a Virginia State Trooper and a North Carolina State Trooper. I could not have had 2 more wonderful troopers stop me. Neither one of them gave me a hard time. Asked me a question or 2. I was speeding. We were 15 miles over the speed limit with the first one. They pulled me over. Didn't realize we changed speed. The guys could not have been nicer. Just said, all right, sir, just take it easy, slow down a little bit. You know, I could have been out of the car. They could have been going through my car. They could have called for backup. They could have demanded this document, that document, everything else. Couldn't have been nicer. And I got stopped with an expired inspection sticker up in Virginia. This guy didn't even make all the way up to the window. I said, I know it's expired, officer. I just got in and you're from North Carolina. He said, okay, you know what to do. One more case where they could have had, 2 or 3 cars there. I'm in cuffs. I don't, my license plate says Berserk, Vietnam vet. Oh, here we go. So I don't mean to imply.
Tea Party license plate.
No, that was my Berserk. I don't mean to imply that there aren't some wonderful law enforcement people out there, but I get very nervous when I see how often SWAT teams are used, how often they're used against places that they weren't intended to be used, how common people like us can be victims of overzealous police. There's no excuse for it, and there's no accountability for it because they get away with it. They absolutely get away with it. And I saw the FBI some years ago go after a friend of mine. They went after him for about 5 years. Fortunately, he had pro bono legal assistance in Washington, D.C. 5 years, and they lied to Congress and senators every step of the way. And they were finally, the FBI were finally revealed when court finally said, okay, we want to see your file on this guy. You're relentlessly pursuing this guy. We want to see your file. One piece of paper in the file from a discredited guy who accused my friend of something which was absolutely untrue. The FBI got their hands on it, and they were not going to let go. And those are travesties of justice. And we as good, freedom-loving, law-abiding citizens cannot condone it. We can't accept it, and we shouldn't accept it. All right, Joe, I have no idea.
You got card.
All right, I'm going to ask, Ron, I have some questions here if I can. Well, we okay with some questions?
Yeah, what we'd like to do is, I'm sure many of you have got some questions, and if so, we've got a microphone over here, so we want everybody in the audience to be able to hear the question before Bill responds to it. So, if you've got questions,